Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our exciting Wednesday webinar. And as you come in, if you can, in the chat below, you'll see a ribbon underneath your screen, hopefully, in the chat area. If you would tell us who you are and where you're from, if you can put that in the chat so we can greet you. I'll, I am Reginald Nichols, the Director of Leadership Development for our conference, and I have the wonderful opportunity to serve you and the church. And we have an exciting webinar for you. Our task force has been working very hard on this. So it's good to see Jola and Barbara and Debbie. It's good to see you, Debbie. I know you checked in with us yesterday, but it's good to see you again today. Alice and Edith, it's wonderful to have you along with us. And hi, Ruth from Reading. Wonderful up there. I know you got some rain today, like most of us did. Um, Juliet, it's good to see you um, joining us for this exciting webinar. As we get started, just to remind you that all webinars will be recorded and they'll be posted on our Cal Nevada website, Facebook, and YouTube. We also will list our upcoming schedule and presenters on our website. So please check it out. Look for our upcoming webinars. Please share these with your community and with your congregation. Invite them to join us as we journey with Christ. Um, everyone might not be able to get it synchronously. That means live. But remember, you can always check it out on YouTube or Facebook after the fact. Before we get started, please note that we will not have a Wednesday webinar next week. In this moment of sheltering in place and being in purple zones and those types of things, we want you to be safe and to spend time giving thanks during this Thanksgiving season. So next Wednesday, there'll be no Wednesday webinar, but we have an exciting schedule, a full schedule in December. So please watch your instant connection. We have some joint celebration and prayer time scheduled for December, along with some great information and action topics. So watch your instant connections. Thanks also to Selby Ewing and Tua Yang, who always work behind the scenes with us in the communications. We appreciate it, helping us put these webinars on each and every week. During the month of November, we'll continue to focus our webinars on a familiar passage of scripture found in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. Everyone knows about it. It's the Good Samaritan, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in this era of social distancing, we can embrace healthy government affirmed reasons to stay away from our neighbor. But God calls us to something different. God calls us, even in the midst of this COVID pandemic, God is calling us to reach out to our neighbor. Who is our neighbor? If they don't look like us, if they don't look like me, if they don't act like me, if they don't vote like me and not in my circle of friends, who are they? How can I be a neighbor and follow Jesus' words to go and do likewise? One of the things that we learn from the parable is that the Samaritan took action, but he didn't do it alone. So, what can we do so that our children and youth are not assaulted or criminalized? And that's the focus of our webinar this afternoon. Today, we want to provide some timely information from our task force and criminalization of children and youth. And they've worked so hard. We've been working for about a month putting this together. So I'm so grateful for those that are joining us today. So I want to introduce the task force, and then I will turn it over to Michael Yoshi. But our task force, Patricia Doherty and Michael Yoshi, Hubert Ivory, Ruth Stacy, Joanne Lawson, and Angela Brown. We have on the panel today some facilitators who are working with us, but I want to just give them a wonderful round of applause for their work on this important topic. So, Michael, I'll turn it over to you as you introduce this exciting topic to us. Before you get started, don't forget, put your comments in the chat if you need to. And also, if you have questions, we'll have a Q&A at the end. Put your questions in the Q&A space, and we'll be looking forward to those questions toward the end of our time together. So, Michael, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Reggie. So I want to welcome everyone for joining us today, and thank you for taking the time to be with us for this webinar sponsored by the Task Force on Criminalization of Children and Youth. The task force comes out of a resolution in 2019 that was sponsored by the Advocacy and Justice Committee, and that created the task force and brought back our report to annual conference this past year. I want to thank Reggie for facilitating this webinar for us and kind of being our framer and also our facilitator, and also Tua Yang for providing the technical support for us today as well. Just a little bit of background, the task force work has examined the interconnectedness of the nature of incarceration of children and youth in different contexts around the world, and particularly the ways that systemic racism and systemic evil undergirds these practices. We've also researched how the military, prison, and security industries profit off of the expense of children and youth. The detailed report that the task force worked on in the last year is entitled "Let the Children Come to Me," and that was provided to the annual conference in September, along with a short video summary report. Because we met virtually during annual conference, there was no opportunity for us to have dialogue with one another on the report, and also to assist people in engagement with the resources that we had developed and produced. So today's webinar really provides that opportunity. It's like a follow-up to annual conference for our intents and purposes. And our intention today is to really create a sense of community and collaboration with one another so that we can advance our work together on anti-racist practices, policies, and actions, particularly as it pertains to this topic around incarceration of children and youth. From your registrations and responses to our questionnaire, we know that you all represent a diverse range of experiences with these issues. Some of you we know have done some deep studies already and have read materials, while others are just looking for a way to begin and are just joining us to get into the mix of things. Some of you we know are involved with groups beyond your local church, like the United Methodist Women's Groups, and have been working on particular issues around school to prison pipeline, and you have knowledge that you can also share with us in our endeavors. While others are looking for ways to just grapple with the issues of racism and basic concepts of social justice within your congregations. You're looking for a starting place. So wherever you are on the spectrum of knowledge and learning and praxis, we want to honor your presence here today and want you to know that all the questions you may have are welcome and valued, and also that any information that you have to share or resources, knowledge base that can help us advance this work together is also welcome. We want to begin our time together with the viewing of the video that we showed at annual conference. For some of you, it may be a reviewing of it. For others of you, it may be the first time you'll see it, but it's a short clip that summarizes our report. And then from there, we're going to go to breakout groups so we can have smaller discussion and community building. And then following the small groups, we'll come back to a larger plenary for report back and Q&A. And then we will conclude with action steps that each of you might want to take, or some discussions around how we can move forward together in this work together.
Grace, a 15-year-old Black high school sophomore, was sent to juvenile detention during COVID-19 for not doing her homework. She was released after 78 days. 5-year-old Helen was separated from her grandmother upon arriving to Texas from Honduras and detained for 2 months. Mahmoud, a 13-year-old Palestinian, was shot and arrested by Israeli soldiers as part of the military occupation of Palestine. The Task Force on Criminalization of Children and Youth reports on how these stories are part of a larger system of injustice, which demonizes and racially targets children and youth of color. Profit-making is at the heart of social systems which turn children and youth into commodities devoid of human value. Military industries receive billions in corporate contracts from the Department of Defense and in turn influence military policy. 9/11 ushered in a war on terror, the longest war in US history. The enemy in the war on terror changes with the political winds and financial interests. The war on terror has a domestic front with the militarization of border control and the demonization of immigrants as a threat to our society. Local police departments have been militarized and federal law enforcement enlisted to control Black Lives Matter protests in cities across the country. In the name of national security, children and youth are sent to privately run migrant detention centers like Homestead in Florida. In the 1980s, political opponents to civil rights fabricated a war on drugs, leading to the expansion of US prisons and corporate privatization of the industry as a virtual war on brown and Black people. Inequity and underfunding in education has created a school-to-prison pipeline. The legacy of slavery and this new form of racial control is chronicled in Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. Remembering Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Alexander has spoken out on Palestinian suffering, connecting global military injustice to domestic inequality. Up to 700 children, Palestinian children, are arrested annually by the Israeli military. Children are often apprehended in their homes late at night, are tied, blindfolded, and interrogated as criminals. The criminalization and incarceration of children does not just happen by coincidence, but is part of systemic racial injustice. This is a critical issue of faith for the Church. We invite you to read the full report on the conference website.
We want to give you an opportunity to react to the video presentation that you just saw. In a moment, you will be placed in a breakout room. Each breakout room will include one facilitator who will also have the job of reporting back to the whole group. As we recall the story of the Good Samaritan that was referred to earlier, place yourself in the shoes of a Good Samaritan, of a good neighbor. What are your thoughts and feelings about children who lie injured along the roadside? What motivates you to help them?
Well, we're moving on to something new, Lee.
Go ahead.
Now is the time for the facilitators to report back what they heard in their breakout groups. And I'll call each facilitator by name, and you should briefly report on what you heard. Please try to take no more than a minute so we can hear from all of the groups. But I also invite anybody who has something that doesn't get covered to enter it in the chat so that we can have benefit of that. And I will tell you people that we are very interested, the task force is very interested in what you have to say and where your church is with social issues. Now, in my group, for example, the participants were concerned about what they see is the disconnect between the systemic situations and what they see, what people see, how they manage to disconnect from the conditions of the children at the border, for example, and from different situations in our society, which speak beyond what you can do with charity. That led to a discussion of charity, the difference of charity and social justice and personal piety, that the churches do not seem to have a real grasp of just what social justice may be. A number of them reported that their churches don't accept things like the idea of systemic racism or of climate change. So it makes it difficult to do social justice work in those contexts. So now, Hubert,
Thank you, Ruth.
what was your group's concerns and thoughts?
Well, my group had a very good group, and they shared quite a bit. And so I want to try to summarize a little bit of what they said. First of all of them were very heartbroken and, and concerned about what happens to children. And a number of them had been engaged in doing work themselves or with their churches. And and one of the things that came up was the fact that a lot of these kids were kind of like, they end up instead of having intervention before going into these lockup facilities, they just go directly from the point of being approached by a police officer or someone into the criminal justice system. And and they felt like sometimes these kids were already kind of grouped as to being bad kids or going to turn out a certain way. So there's quite a bit of concern about that, and all of them had some interesting things to share about their own experiences in terms of dealing with situations where kids were at risk, and especially immigrant kids.
Hey, Michael, Yoshi.
Thanks, Ruth. We had a good group, two people representing Sacramento area, one from Lodi and one from Dixon. One theme that was emerging was how do we deal with these kinds of issues when the people's stories are not right in front of us? They're not part of our families or not part of our immediate communities. And so they can be somewhat removed. And so it's almost like, you can forget your neighbor because you don't really know these stories. And how do we help bring these stories more alive and present to our communities and our congregations? Although one person did say that his wife was Arab, so that the portion that we had around the Palestinian incarceration really was very relevant because of what they know already about the situation there. And also the comment that the ways in which we can tell stories by pictures is much better than just spewing out statistics. And so I think that was an affirmation of video storytelling, but also the storytelling that can go on from first person. I think we had also some good serendipitous connections being made because Kathy is chairing the new Children and Youth Task Force for the conference. And our task has already met with them, and we're talking about how we can work together as they advance their work for children and youth ministries and this work on incarceration of children and youth as well. And then one person was part of UMW and aware of the UMW studies that are taking place around school to prison pipeline and how we can work together to advance that work and also make those connections between the UMW studies and our intersectional studies that we're doing as well. I think that summarizes it for me.
Thank you, Michael. Angela, what did your group have to say?
Had a very good group. And like Michael's group, it's difficult sometimes when you don't actually see the children, as we say, on the side of the road. But for those that had seen pictures of children in the border facility in cages, and being an American citizen and knowing that your country was doing that made most of them feel guilty about that. And also being aware that the children will suffer from developmental and emotional issues later in life as a result of that kind of incarceration. There was one member of our group that was a member of SURJ, SURJ. And that's a very good group because it brings alongside people that aren't people of color to bring them up to speed as to what's going on with our children and other incarceration issues. And so they can be vocal and also speak on behalf of incarcerated children. And that particular group was successful in the San Jose district with getting the police out of the schools. And that has been something that has been happening in most of our school districts here lately, is that there has been a public outcry of getting the police out of the schools. Also, the pushback to that was that most white parents are concerned about someone coming into the school and, shooting students, whereas parents of children of color are more concerned about their kids being targeted by the police. So just doing some education on that issue would be good.
Thank you,
And
Angela.
also push back against building a new jail, which was going to cost over $40 million. So they've been active in doing that too.
Thanks. Patricia.
Well, we had a good group as well. Thank you. Our group, in response to what motivated them, it first came out was certainly compassion, but also they talked about that compassion came out of relationship building, of actually working with children. And several of them had worked in situations where they had worked with children and youth who were underserved. So, and also through that, then in the relationship building, to being able to listen to the children. And so we talked about building partnerships, not only between our congregations and each other, faith and secular, but also with the people who are affected by racism, by poverty, by, different forms of oppression. And let's see. So there was also recognition of how COVID is affecting them and their work and their ability to reach out. And there is a real sense of personal loss and connection, but also a real concern about the children affected by COVID and the distancing and the lack of programs and this sort of thing. So, yeah, and I found a new neighbor. One person in my group has actually moved to Sacramento. So that was nice. So we'll be connecting. And then we also focus on how, again, the Samaritan didn't do it alone. And one person remarked on they'd never thought about that they didn't do it alone. And again, that goes back to the partnership building. And then also there was a reflection on how we choose not to see sometimes. Because who were the ones that walked by before the Good Samaritan? Why did they choose not to stop? Why did they choose not to see? When do we choose not to see? And when do we allow our children or not allow our children to see too? So that was our group. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Connie Hunter.
Well, we had a great group too, and one of our members was a school teacher. She's retired now, but she just talked about, the difficult students in her class, the kids that were really struggling and she didn't know with what, and, just the challenges I think all of us experience when we look at that video about, our hearts go out to these kids. This is really wrong and awful, but what can we do? And who can help us, do something in response to improve the situation for the children? And she experienced that just in her classroom, trying to work with the children and create a situation where they could become all God created them to be, but not knowing where to get the help that was needed. Val was in our group and talked about children in the Philippines being incarcerated as a result of the total war on drugs. And that sometimes the kids are victims of drug trafficking, and rather than getting them help, rehab and education and that kind of thing, they find themselves incarcerated. And so he moved us toward thinking about, okay, so what does the church do? And just that the church needs to be more courageous today, and that we need to just demand that the incarceration of children and youth end now, and then be sure that the children that might have otherwise been incarcerated get the rehab and the education that they need to thrive, and to be fully engaged in our world. It was a good conversation, and I think people were eager to talk about, okay, so what can we do? And we acknowledge the importance of doing it together in collaboration. So looking for partners. So thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Fran Eldridge. Can't hear you, Fran.
Sorry about that. So my group was also wonderful and very interested in talking and contributing. We talked about feeling, after watching the video, brokenhearted. It was very painful to watch that we were in a third world country now, where that kind of stuff happens in a third world country, but it's happening in our country also. Someone mentioned that they were very thrilled that their church is willing to look at these difficult, painful issues and do something. That she had friends who sort of would say, oh yes, ain't it awful, but then their group, or they were not willing or able to move forward in any way. Someone mentioned the over 545 lost, kidnapped children who we will need to struggle mightily to reunite with their families, and how we as a church can be more involved in society and make sure that these things happen. The Sparks Reno area was well represented, and they mentioned they have at least two programs. One's called Children's Cabinet, and it's a place where children, there's a symbol as I imagine it, in the window, and so if children are in trouble, they know that's a safe place to go and someone will help them figure out their situation. And there's also a group called Awaken, which is dealing with human trafficking. How do we help these, for example, those two groups in the Sparks Reno area work more collaboratively and see the intersectionality of the thing? We were aware, we thought, how did we miss this report from the task force? And so we had a good discussion about that and realized that it needs to be better put out into the public so that it's easier to reach. So JB Bray Finley was in our group, and so she entered it into our chat, but she's also going to write an article about this webinar and put that at the end of the webinar, because that will have lots of good information. Sharon Delgado also mentioned her book. Sharon, can you pipe up, or Lee, with the name of that?
I just downloaded it, so I have it right here. It's Shaking the Gates of Hell by Sharon Delgado. Do you want me to put it in the chat?
Sure.
Yeah.
So people are making connections, but we want to be more involved with making the good connections and being able to work as a church and stir up society. Thank you.
Thank you. Gloria Fern. Gloria, can't hear you.
Okay. Yes, I had a wonderful group: Juliet, Reggie, Sonia, and Deborah. And several of us had worked in schools, mostly schools and social service organizations that dealt with children, and had a lot of experience with underserved children and children who were being left by the side of the road. And we were expressing how difficult it is at this time, especially you can't get your hands on kids because of COVID and so forth. But how difficult it is, because this is really a systemic problem. This is, it would be manageable if it were one child beside the road, but you know, when we live in Stockton and there are 1,500 people on the streets and a lot of children who are sleeping on sofas or in unheated garages or what have you, it seems unmanageable. And so what we finally came to was that, you know, the way we change a system is by educating and advocating, and that churches are wonderful places to do that. And so I guess that's that. I think that was the crux of what we got to, that we really need to educate ourselves and our churches and find ways to advocate. And you know, advocating doesn't have to be a contentious process. It can be something that grows from the experiences of our people.
Thank you. Thank you, Gloria. Brian Fry.
I'd like to say that when we brought up the original question that Hubert presented, there was not a lot to say. People said, yes, of course, I want to. What someone pointed out, that the vulnerability of the children was what struck her. So to expand that a little bit, I said, so what do we find the biggest challenges to acting as a good Samaritan? If we all kind of think that's what we should do, and we know what gets in our way. And so there were a couple of things that came up in there. One is just not being aware of a lot of this being new information to them. And that was one of the things. This is from out in Fallon, Nevada, but not even realizing that a lot of schools had police in them. And so just that was kind of shocking and something to think about. On the other side of that, people are so aware of so many needs and problems where a good Samaritan is needed. Figuring out where is the greatest need. We need to get the information and figure out where we need to prioritize, or where do we, what is the greatest need right now. So it's either not knowing enough or knowing so much that you don't know where to start. Another person expressed just thinking, you know, politically at the federal level, how can we deal with this immigration issue and these children in detention? What are the resources about federal legislation or ways to change how the federal government responds to that? The other challenge that we have is thinking about how just in many of our churches, it's just natural for the church to want to avoid controversial issues because we're a friendly, wonderful group and we like each other, and the purpose of church is worship and fellowship. And so how do we actually get over that hurdle in our churches to actually address these issues? How to move to people to seeing them not just as political, but as religious and faith-based issues to work on. And I'm sure that's what this group has been doing a lot of for many years. One person even said, it's so bad where I live in a very conservative area to even bring this up. It's just, people just don't want to talk about it. So fear, I think, is one of the themes. Fear of loss of community in your own church is one of the inhibiting factors for keeping us from being good Samaritans. I think someone pointed out, though, people need to be pushed a little bit, and that when you push and get uncomfortable, it does open up some conversations that maybe bring a little bit of change. So I think that's enough.
Thank you,
We
Brian.
had a good group too.
Sorry, I didn't. Now, Patricia Daughtery will discuss what we can do with this. The next steps. Patricia?
All right, thanks, Ruth. And I also just want to acknowledge the folks that stepped out to be facilitators, standby facilitators. We wanted to have small breakouts. So that would be Connie Hunter, Fran Eldridge, Gloria Fern, and Brian Fry. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really want to thank all of you for coming and participating and also now and also some of you express yourselves in when you registered, what you were looking for and what things you've been working on. And I've heard some of that again and in some of the comments made here, but definitely sharing of ideas, collaborating, working together, learning from one another, what came up a lot. And also the other aspect of how do we get beyond talk and how do we get to action? And of course, yeah, you know, service is great, but how do we advocate? So moving into those next steps, I noticed that JB already put up the link to the website, which has the report. Yeah, and I'm gonna, yeah. So already, great, it's great. People are sharing things in the chat. If you can't see the chat for whatever reason, we are going to just, you're now forewarned. We have your emails. We're going to be in touch. Okay. So we're going to do a follow-up here. And we definitely, because this is all about, this is what we're hearing. We want the sharing. You know, if you don't, you can delete, but you know, this is a way we can communicate and support one another in this work. So definitely we'll be supporting things or sharing things that were in the chat. But I also wanted to, share the website and orient you to the website. So I'm going to put that up. Can you all see this? You're muted, so you can't tell me. Thumbs up?
Yeah,
I guess.
it's on.
Okay,
Yep,
thank
good.
you. Okay. So this is the website. JB put it into the chat already. We can send it in our follow-up email, but I'm going to go down here and show you that, again, here you can read the full report here. You click on this, it goes to the full report. I'm going to come back to this. You can watch the video that you saw, the 3-minute video. You can share the video. You can read the resolution that was passed at annual conference here. And then we have recommendations for faith in action, which I'm going to get to. Here, down here, you'll see the 3 children, the stories of the 3 children that we highlighted in our report to talk about these 3 different areas. And so you can read Helen's story, Grace's story. You can click down here. And there's some background as well for each of these to talk about, give a little bit of background about how this happens to these children. And then down here, more. We've kind of broken up the report because it's long, but so you can just read the stories in the background. You can read the introduction to the report. You can read a section on the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child and learn why the United States has not ratified it and what, you know, what we should do about that. Then there's a big meaty section, lots of information on the intersection of military security complex with the prison industrial complex and its impact on children and youth. And we wanted to give this as background and context for how this can happen, because it really allows us to see the intersections between these issues. And then we have a section here, webinars. There was a webinar that was done in June, and we have some video presentations. So you can look at that later. And then down here, we have you can click on this and you can see a theological reflection and discussion guide. In a sense, this is a little bit of a study guide already. You could use this in your church, especially if you have a church that's just beginning to look at some of these issues. It's a good way for them to look and then reflect and kind of open up the discussion. And here, down here, you can contact us, and we'll be contacting you. But this is an email you can contact us at for questions. Now, I want to go back up here to recommendations for faith in action. Is it going to work? There it is. Okay. So here, now as part of the resolution, the annual conference voted to endorse these 3 pieces of federal legislation. and you have an opportunity to also take action. So they're outlined here. And it is the Ending Punitive Unfair, well, we'll call it the Ending Pushout Act of 2019. We have here a way that you can contact your representative and share that you want them to sign on and endorse this. There's some background information provided by United Methodist Women, excellent. So to inform yourself a little bit more or share with your congregation. But you can act here as an individual, or you could see if your Peace and Social Justice or your Church and Society or your missions group might sign on. And then the other one was promoting human rights for Palestinian children living under Israeli military occupation. The No Way to Treat a Child campaign has more information for you there. And here's a way to contact your representative as well to get them to co-sponsor and support. But as well, you can be a private citizen signing on, and you can share this also. Now, the next section is the bill with the Refugee Protection Act, which incorporated the Keep Families Together Act. Now, again, these were endorsed by the conference, but this is how you can act individually or act as a congregation or wherever you're wanting to act. And again, click here to find out who you need to contact and then more information. Okay, so our intent is to hopefully put more information here. The other one, yes, it was amended to include AB 901, asking the governor to sign on to that, and that bill was actually, and that was to end punitive actions of children in schools. And you can learn more about that bill here, but the governor did sign it into law, so that was a good note. Now back to these three pieces of legislation. You are aware that this Congress is ending come December 31st, so these bills will go away, but they are still worth showing your support for. And to my knowledge, from what I've been hearing, they will be reintroduced, of course, with different numbers, and they may come out in different forms, but this is kind of just pushing it along. And our federal government is not going to do anything without us helping to push it along. So let's see, let me go back. So then I wanted to share that, I wanted to share that the UMW is going to have a film coming out. I'm going to put this in the chat because you can register here. A film on Push Out, the criminalization of Black girls in schools. It's going to be showing on December 8th, a Zoom kind of, I can't do these things all at the same time. I don't see the chat. I will share it in the chat. So it's
in the chat. It's in the United Methodist study book on the issue, but we can we'll put the link for the Zoom meeting in the chat.
It's for this particular film.
Got it.
That's what I wanted to. Maybe when I stop sharing it, the chat will show up.
Yes.
Actually, it's because Patricia, it's because it was a question I asked Connie privately, so you probably don't see it for the whole group. She answered me privately.
No, I put it in the whole group.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Connie has it there. Those study
This is
books.
talking about a filming of the criminalization of Black girls in schools, which is on December 8th.
Yeah. Okay. I did it. I think it went. No, it didn't go. There it is. Okay, can you see it?
Not yet. Yeah, there it is now.
Okay, I doubt that. I doubt that link works. So we will send it out. We will send it out in our follow-up email very shortly. And then along with, if you're concerned about the jailing of kids and what's happening during COVID, there's a petition you can also sign asking that Palestinian children be released from the jails at this time, the Israeli military jails at this time during the COVID time. So I'll send that all, we'll send that all in a follow-up email. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to do, and I hope we can have a little time. How are we doing on time? Do we have time for questions?
We'll create some space for questions and answers. So First, I want to thank this task force. As you can see, they worked very hard on not only this presentation, but they've worked very hard in working behind the scenes on behalf of all of us to get this information out. So please support, please go to the website, get the links, look at how you can become involved in this wonderful work relative to the criminalization of children and youth. We want to see if you had any questions that you might have. I think the best way would be if you can look at your screen at the bottom, there should be a way that you can raise your hand. If you can raise your hand, we can answer some questions. All of us are live now, so I mean, if all of us started asking questions at once, it'd be worse than Thanksgiving at the Nichols house. But if you can raise your hand, if you raise your hand if you have some questions, or put the question in the chat, and we can bring it up if you have any questions. So I'm going to be looking to see if any hands are raised, and then just unmute yourself when I call on you. So if anyone, any questions for this task force? Yeah, Brian, I see your, yeah, Brian, yes, unmute yourself.
Okay. I just wanted, I sort of took our small group off on a tangent, like a facilitator is not supposed to do, in bringing up more of a historical issue about what happened to Native American youth, indigenous people in this country, in the BIA schools, and that whole process. Unfortunately, we actually had a member of our group who is Native American who experienced that or heard stories about that from the generation before him. And I guess my question is in this process of the school to prison pipeline, I've been thinking about it primarily from the point of view of African-American and Black students, but I'm wondering if any information, because it seems to me the legacy of what's happened to the indigenous people probably still has effects on children now. And so I was wondering if that is a piece in any of that information.
Sure.
Yes, that is in the report. And unfortunately, Native children and youth are disproportionately represented and being expelled, suspended, incarcerated. And the truth is, once children are expelled and it's suspended from school, their chances of being jailed are much higher. And certainly if you're a Native or a person of color, it's greatly increased. Thanks for the question.
Any other questions? If you can raise your hand, I'm looking around to see we can catch your question, and then you can unmute yourself. I know there was a question. I'll answer. A question came up about the this webinar and the past webinars. They'll be available on YouTube. They're available on Facebook. They're also available through links from our website. So these will be available so you can pass them along, okay? Bonnie, I see you have your hand up. I want you to ask your question, unmute yourself.
Yes, just in the last year or two, I've gotten on board with police in the schools. And up until that time, I was very naive about police are good guys in the schools. And I do think that police are good guys and gals. But in the report, I'm sure I'll be able to read something. Is there books and articles for beginners in looking at this particular issue should start?
Yeah, Patricia, someone you want to answer that question?
Well, I was going to ask Michael or Ruth if they wanted to comment on this. Yeah. Where'd they go?
How about asking Angela? Angela probably knows more.
Or Angela, there you are.
Yeah.
Angela, unmute. Unmute, dear.
What was the question specifically?
Where to start in my reading and study of police in the schools? up until, a year or two ago when I was really working with United Methodist Women and Social Action, I was still thinking like many people that it's just a good thing, and I still think it can be a good thing, and people have talked to me about that. But do you have a resources where people who, like me, who really want to get involved in that issue could start with our study?
I think reading the book Push Out would be a great start.
I have not read that, so.
Yeah, although that focuses on the criminalization of Black girls, the same thing applies to Black boys. Also, I would say whatever your county is, talk to the school district and see what the school district is doing. Are there actual police in the school? And if so, start having conversations about what is the proportion of Black students or brown students that are arrested or contacted by the police versus Anglo students, and just start those conversations. But I think as a foundation, Push Out would be an excellent book for you to read.
Now you're reminding me that we worked with Carl Pinkston and the Black Parallel School Board, and that was one of the same recommendations to go to your local counties and districts. So thank you.
Bonnie, where are you located?
Down in Tulare, between
Tulare.
Fresno and Bakersfield.
There's actually a webinar tomorrow in the Bay Area, East Bay, led by youth on police in the schools. If you're interested, I can get it to you.
And
It's-
also check and
Thank
see
you.
if your county has a chapter of Surge, SURJ.
Right, and I put the link for Surge in the chat. So please look at the chat. And Michael, if you have any information relative to what you just said, if you could put it in the chat, because when we record, both all of this and the chat is saved. So if you can put it in the chat, if you can find it, that would be helpful.
I have to go find it.
Okay, if you can,
All right.
if you can. If not, well, we know who everybody is. We can send it to-
Another
it to them directly.
has been the American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers. And we can share this in the follow-up too.
Right.
But they're
Right.
doing good work on this as well.
Any other questions that are coming up that you might have? Just raise your hand and we can find you, and then you can unmute. Again, these webinars, I talked with Tua while we were going through, and he said the webinar from last week will be up probably by this evening or by tomorrow. The webinar that we had last week will be up on YouTube on Christian unity and interreligious relationships, and this be up. It takes about 3 to 4 to at most 7 days to with all that Tua and Selby are doing to put it up on YouTube and Facebook, but it should be there. Any other questions that you might have for this wonderful task force?
I saw
Huh?
Paul Fillon raise his hand as if he needed to say something at one
Yeah,
point.
Paul. Thanks.
I don't know if Phil's still on the call, but I was just wondering if there was any stance that at this point would bring to our youth ministries to possibly be aware of, any particular issues, just to anything that he recommends to bring to their attention.
Yeah, he's on the call. Fel, do you want to answer that?
Hi, thank you for that question, Paul. And the Conference Committee on Young People's Ministry created a new ministry team, which is called Peace and Justice. And we're looking at how to resource the local churches in the area, work on social justice, economic justice, and ecological justice, just like the World Student Christian Federation is doing. And so I would be very glad to be in contact with you, Paul, and the other Young People's Ministry directors, because we have members of the Conference Committee on Young People's Ministry that are willing to talk with leadership in the district and then leadership of the youth and young adult and children in our local churches. And another thing that maybe I may be able to add, as Catherine Morris is also on the call, is that the Children's Task Force is working on a survey in order to find out from our churches what are they doing with regards to children's ministry, and also on how we create in children the culture of knowing on how to participate in the social justice work. So I think this is what we're doing at this moment.
Thanks.
Thank you, Val.
Hey,
Thanks,
Reggie,
Val. Yes.
Reggie,
Yeah.
I
Michael.
tried to copy that link, but I was not successful in getting the link. So I just forwarded the email to you.
Okay, I'll make sure it, I'll check it and see what can be done to get it out to everybody. So I will make sure that we can get it out to everybody. I'll ask to help me with that, so that even with the video, we can get that out to everybody that attended, since we have everybody's email. I want to thank everyone, especially this committee, again, this task force, for their hard work and their diligent efforts. Please, let's continue to support this wonderful work. One of the reasons that we have the webinars is there's so many wonderful things that are going on in the conference, and we just want to lift it up so that people will say, well, how can I serve? How can I be involved? What can I do? Well, like the Good Samaritan on the road, there's something that you can do, even if it's for one. It makes a difference in the lives of many. So we want to thank you and thank the task force for your wonderful work. Again, there's not going to be a webinar next week, but we look forward to our webinars in December. We'll have a different webinars, and we'll have a gathering of across the conference, a couple of worship and convening times. So look forward to seeing everybody in 2 weeks. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Please stay safe. God bless you as we seek to serve our Lord Jesus Christ. All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.